Nevada will once again get even less water from the Colorado River.
Tier 1 water shortage on the nation's largest reservoir, Lake Mead, today.
The experts say it would take years of winters like this one just to begin to replenish what's been lost. I mean, this reservoir is like a bank account.
A white stain runs around the entire shoreline of Lake Mead, a stripe of bleached rock left behind by decades of retreating water. It looks almost like a tide mark in a drained bathtub. From the air, it reads as a scar. Standing at the water's edge, it reads as a warning. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. It was last full in 1983. It hasn't come close since. Since the year 2000, the surface has dropped by roughly 160 feet. A lake built to hold 26 million acre-feet, enough to drown the entire state of Pennsylvania under a foot of water, now holds barely a third of that. 25 million people depend on what's left. Las Vegas pulls 90% of its tap water from this single source. So do the farm belts of Arizona and California, and a slice of northern Mexico besides. And beneath the surface, there's a number that changes everything once the lake reaches it: 895 feet above sea level. Below that line, a threshold engineers call dead pool water can no longer physically pass through the dam. No outflow, no hydropower, no river downstream. For every city and farm that built its water system assuming the Colorado River would always keep flowing, dead pool isn't an engineering term. It's the end of the arrangement. Las Vegas saw this coming 2 decades ago and spent $1.5 billion preparing. That infrastructure is running right now. This is how the river got here, and what happens if it keeps going. In 1931, with a quarter of the country out of work, the federal government bet big on a single construction site in the Nevada desert. The Colorado River had spent decades flooding towns in spring and running nearly dry by summer, untamable at any scale that mattered. The answer was Hoover Dam. 5 years, over 5,000 workers at peak, temperatures past 120 F, and 25 million cubic yards of poured concrete, enough to pave a 2-lane highway coast to coast. When it was finished in 1936, it was the tallest concrete dam on Earth, backing up a reservoir that stretched 112 miles into the desert. That reservoir is Lake Mead. Full, it holds close to 9 trillion gallons, enough to supply every household in America for roughly 13 years. Everything that followed Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles at their current scale exists because this structure made a desert river reliable. For decades, the system worked exactly as designed. In November 1922, 7 states signed the Colorado River Compact, splitting 16.5 million acre-feet of water a year between them, plus another 1.5 million promised to Mexico. The number sounded permanent. It wasn't. The negotiators had measured the river during 1906-1929, one of the wettest stretches in its recorded history, and treated that anomaly as the baseline. The actual long-term average, measured across 3 centuries, is closer to 13.5 million acre-feet. Since 2000, the river has delivered even less than that, around 12 million. Every single year, roughly a quarter of the water promised on paper simply isn't there. That shortfall has been quietly draining out of Lake Mead's storage for 25 years. 1,200 feet in 2000. Below 150 by 2004. Below 1,100 by 2010. A formal Tier 1 shortage declared in 2021. A record low of 1,041 feet in 2022 boat ramps stranded on dry land. Sunken wreckage resurfacing after 80 years underwater. Researchers studying tree rings call this the driest stretch in at least 1,200 years, not a passing drought, but a structural shift, worsened by heat that accelerates evaporation and shrinks the mountain snowpack that feeds the river each spring. The Bureau of Reclamation manages the decline through a tiered shortage system. At 1,075 feet, Arizona loses 18% of its annual allocation, Nevada and Mexico smaller shares. At 1,050, the cuts deepen. At 1,035, the tier that matters most for Power 12 of Hoover Dam's 17 turbines stop functioning, slashing generation by 70% overnight. Below that sit 2 lines with no more room to negotiate. At 950 feet, the water can no longer reach the turbine intakes at all hydropower simply stops. At 895, dead pool, the dam can no longer release water downstream. full stop. The lake sits 160 feet above that line today. In 2000, it had 330 feet of cushion. It has burned through half its margin in 25 years, and the trend line has not bent the other way. This past winter, Rocky Mountain snowpack came in at record lows, and a March heat wave burned off what little runoff remained before it could reach the river. Lake Powell Mead's upstream partner fell faster than any forecast had predicted. Facing a choice between protecting Powell's own power generation or keeping releases into Mead steady, federal water managers chose to protect Powell. Releases downstream were cut by nearly 1.5 million acre-feet for the year. The consequence, Bureau projections now put Lake Mead as low as 1,020 feet by summer 2027, 20 feet below the 2022 record, with a potential 40% cut to Hoover Dam's power output as soon as this fall. The 7 states missed their February 2026 deadline to agree on a replacement framework. The current guidelines expire at year's end. As of now, there's no deal. Here's the twist. Las Vegas, the city everyone assumes is the problem, draws less than a tenth of what Arizona is allocated and a fraction of what farms across the basin consume. And it spent the last 20 years preparing for exactly this moment, ripping out 250 million square feet of decorative grass, recycling nearly all indoor water back into the lake, and banking over 2.2 million acre-feet underground. The centerpiece, a $1.5 billion third intake, bored 4.7 kilometers under the reservoir floor and paired with a dedicated low-level pumping station. Together, they can pull water from as low as 875 feet, 20 feet below dead pool. If the day comes when Hoover Dam can no longer release water to anyone downstream, Las Vegas, alone among the cities on this lake, can still draw from what's left. None of it changes how much water the river actually carries. The new turbines being installed at Hoover Dam, engineered to keep generating down to 950 feet, are the same kind of answer brilliant engineering solving for a symptom, not the cause. The bathtub ring on Lake Mead's walls marks water that used to be there and isn't coming back on its own. The real question isn't whether the infrastructure can keep up. It's whether 7 states can agree to take less from a river that was overpromised before the first shovel of concrete ever went into Black Canyon.